JK, I hear you wanted to run some Rust code in the cloud without having to manage servers.
Yes, that's right, Martin. Not all serverless platforms can support Rust, but I found one that does.
Welcome to the show, JK.
Happy to be here.
You worked with cloud computing across banking, insurance, technology, and mining. You worked on systems that receive 2 requests per day and on systems that receive 2 billion requests per day.
That's right, Martin.
So why did you want to use Rust in the cloud?
Well, I heard a lot about Rust, and in some reading that I've been doing lately, in some surveys, it was found that Rust is the most loved language by its users. So I wanted to try it out in the cloud. And being a serverless enthusiast, I didn't want a server, so I had to find a way to do it.
Yes, and Rust is not available on many serverless platforms right now.
That's right. It's not available on many at all. It's not a top 10 most used language, so its popularity isn't quite there, and therefore most cloud providers don't support it out of the box. I went looking for a way to find it.
If only there was a way to run any code in the cloud.
That's right. Containers can solve that problem. And with Cloud Run, we can run any kind of container without having to manage a server.
Show me how it's done.
Okay, so here's the source code. This HTTP server is using the Hyper web framework. As you can see here, the main function here is the entry point to the application. It listens to HTTP requests, and the service function that runs has a function which itself takes a service function. That function accepts a HTTP request, which we call rustless. And that rustless function simply returns a HTTP 200 or a status OK and the accompanying text in the classic hello world, but I made it a bit more fun to make it hello rustless.
Right, great. That's a great first app because once you have hello Rust, hello world running, then you can build it out to be an API for a web app or mobile app, right?
Absolutely. So all you need is a Dockerfile to build the container. And the Dockerfile that we've got here uses the Rust base image. What it does is then it copies over that source code that we've built into the container. And then we expose and map port 8080 to the internal container's 8080 port. And then we build our binary using the cargo tooling. And finally, we set our command to run when the container starts. And that command is just going to run the Rustless binary that's been produced as part of the build process. And that sits in the release folder.
Got it. And then you need to build the container.
That's right. The Cloud Build service does that for us. And all we need to do in order for Cloud Build to do the work for us is define a Cloud Build YAML. And that explains what Cloud Build needs to do and the steps it needs to take to build that artifact. The first step in the Cloud Build the Dockerfile commands that we talked about previously, and then it publishes the container registry. The second step in this Cloud Build file is to deploy the service to Cloud Run. And in this case, we've opted to use US Central, but you could replace the region with whatever's closest to you. Finally, there's a substitution section at the bottom that we've used to be able to easily swap out service names if we need to, or if we need to make use of reusable variables. I'll build and deploy the code now.
Look at it go!
Okay, cool. Look at that. The deploy finished and the build's completed. And if we go to the Cloud Run, the Cloud Console into Cloud Run here, we can click on this service here, and then you can see at the top of this page that there's a URL that's a service URL. So if we click on that URL, you'll see a browser tab opens up, and bang, there's the service responding with hello Rustless.
Yeah, very nice. So what makes Rust good for backends like this?
So Rust obviously it's a compiled language, so it's you end up with a binary at the end, and that means that you get a very quick startup time. And since Cloud Run can scale up very quickly, that means that you can scale out to support high peaky demands. Because we end up with a single binary, there's a bit of simplicity sort of associated with that. And Rust uses a lot less memory and is more efficient with the CPU than other languages like maybe Node or Python. And with that, it means you have a lower cloud bill, which is good for your wallet. And finally, it's good for performance critical tasks. So things that need to perform really, really fast, or things that need to that rely on that sort of performance or a high, very low latency. Rust is a good option for that.
Got it. And many Rust programs, they do sort of number crunching on the back end, like data science and such. So you may not want to or need to trigger your code by HTTP, right?
You don't have to trigger your code with HTTP, that's right. You can use other types of triggers, such as queues or Cloud Run jobs. This will skip the HTTP listener altogether, and then your jobs will run your code from the beginning all the way through to the end, and then it will just terminate the container when it's completed.
You also had to write a Dockerfile?
Yeah, the Dockerfile is pretty straightforward, the one that we've used. You can customize, obviously, to your heart's content, but this is just an example. And so what it does is it just uses the Rust-based image, and it would be similar for most Rust services that you'd use. You may want to use a different base image if you've got some customizations going on.
Ah, right. Well, I just copy and paste the same Dockerfile for pretty much all my Node.js project.
Yeah, well, copy paste will get you some of the way, Martin, but it can be fraught with risk. So, for example, you might have some security problems, or some of the images might have vulnerabilities in them.
Makes sense.
So, when working with Dockerfiles, I started to notice some patterns. You can identify the same sort of thing that's happening in different containers and that sort of thing. So highly recommend just having a read through the documentation. And I discovered that it's not too hard to write your own Dockerfile.
So I want to play around with your Rust program and maybe add a simple REST API, do some performance testing.
For sure.
Can I download your code?
Absolutely. I've got a GitHub page which has the code that we've talked about today, along with a blog post that'll explain how to get it all running. And I've had a lot of fun getting into Rust. It's fun to share what I've been learning about, and I hope you enjoy running it.
Thank you for showing us, JK. We should talk more about serverless computing some other time.
That would be awesome. Thanks very much for having me, Martin.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. If you have questions for JK or me, please add them in the comments section. Also, let me know if there are other serverless topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes. I read every single comment. Until next time!